Welcome to the A2 Show with Andrew Cass and Aaron Parkinson, bringing you the trends and topics that affect our lives the most: business, politics, fitness, family, and finance. With over 50 plus years of combined business experience and over $1 billion in revenue generated, your hosts have a unique gift for seeing many steps ahead where others do not. They bring their unfiltered, contrarian views to the show every week to help you win in business and in life.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking today about Bitcoin's parabolic move to finally, Aaron, the $100,000 plus level. Are you a Bitcoin guy, Aaron? We've talked about it before.
I am more than willing to admit when I miss things. I've been looking at Bitcoin at 300, 400, 500, 2,000. I've got a bit.
Yeah. But you have a little exposure, though?
Yeah. I mean, more than probably the average person, but nowhere near what I should have, being that I've been in the digital space for a long time. And the best part about this, because you should always talk about your losses and your wins. So you'll get a real kick out of this, Andrew. About 2 weeks ago, I've been holding XRP for about a decade. And about 2 weeks ago, I said, enough of this piece of crap. I'm just transferring it all to Bitcoin. I'm exhausted waiting for it. And literally the next day to now, it's up 250%.
Yeah, I bought some recently as well. But you didn't. I don't think you made a terrible move if you put some of it in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is like, Bitcoin's the comparison I make to Bitcoin in the crypto space is Bitcoin is gold.
Yeah.
And everything else is silver and copper and platinum and all the second tier metals.
Yeah. I mean, for this 2 week span, I'm taking the L. I mean, I'm still getting the win with the rise of Bitcoin, but I should have certainly got a lot more with the rise of XRP.
Yeah. That thing was like $1.40. It's now like $2.20.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I bought it. I had it at dollar cost averaged at about 35 cents.
Is that right? Wow.
And I had about 30,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been a nice six-figure bump.
There's some big predictions on XRP Ripple as well, which we might touch on a little bit here today. The main focus today will be on Bitcoin, but there's some big predictions on that one, Aaron. So that's why I wanted to have a little bit.
She's spurned me too many times over the last decade. She's been flushed out of my portfolio.
What would have been the downside of just holding on to that $2 little Mickey Mouse that you wanted the money in Bitcoin? You wanted to put it in a faster horse.
If you've been an XRP person for the last 10 years, you know exactly why I pushed it all in Bitcoin 2 weeks ago, right? But it's okay. Bitcoin.
I would say, listen, Aaron, at least you made a lateral move and not an out of the game move.
Yeah, I'm not interested in the out of the game move.
Yeah. And I think what we want to bring to the table here today is, okay, now that Bitcoin is pretty much global news, I think it was global news for the last year or two, but when it crossed 100,000, and at the time of this recording, it's early December 2024, Bitcoin just in the last couple of days made its move past $100,000. I don't know if it stayed there, but it jumped up there for a day or two. And now I'm going to talk about today, and Aaron, I don't even know if you're going to know a lot about what I'm talking about today, about why this might be. It looks like it is an asset class that you want to pay a lot of attention to and has the chance to build you some tremendous wealth over the years, just like the S&P 500 has for many, just like gold has for many, just like the Dow Jones Industrial Average has for many, right? Just like, the list goes on, right? Things that have been staples that have been widely accepted for years. There's two political forces at play, and there are two economic forces at play that make me go, okay, this probably isn't one of those trends in one of those hypey things that doesn't have legs. That's really what I want to get across today. And I think a lot of what I'm going to share probably, like I said, won't be known by many. And I'm going to preface this, Aaron, with, and I told you this earlier, I'm probably 100 plus hours into my own Bitcoin cryptocurrency research. And I've invested a good amount of money in it, and I'm continuing to do so. And I also trade actively daily some of the Bitcoin holding companies that trade publicly that have huge options activity. I like to trade options on the side a little bit, right? So I'm in this world. I guess it kind of reminds me of the hundreds of hours I spent when COVID-19 hit, and I wanted to figure out where did this pandemic come from, and why are all these medicines that have been around for 50 years being banned and censored, and why does this thing they call a vaccine not have any characteristics of a vaccine, and what's really going on? And lo and behold, 3-4 years later, I was spot on like an archery guy who just hit a bullseye. So I don't know if I'm there with this yet, because only the future will tell. but it has a lot of the same characteristics where I don't like to really talk about something publicly or even write about something publicly unless I've done a tremendous amount of research. I like to say, once I've crossed that 100-hour mark, which is where I am right now with Bitcoin. So a couple things at play right here, which we're going to talk about. And Aaron, I think you can probably throw some questions at me since I'm going to take most of this here today. But let's talk about the big two. So obviously the biggest move that came in the last, let's call it 30 to 45 days is because of the election.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you look at, this is the obvious part right here is, okay, the Harris campaign, I don't even know if they know what crypto was or even if they know that Bitcoin exists because they're just that was an alternative reality campaign and candidate. So I don't think it ever came up. I don't even think when they asked the question, I think she just talked about how she grew up in a small town in Atlanta. It was crazy, right? But Trump was like, hey, we want to really make crypto, we want to make America the crypto hub of the world. We support cryptocurrency. We want less regulation and more prosperity. That was a message that resonated extremely well with the American public, by the way.
It resonated very well if you look at CoinMarketCap, everything just went bananas. So you've got the obvious, and this is number one, political, the Trump factor, right? Trump came in and said, I want to remove restrictions and regulation that exist in crypto. Now I want to talk about what are those regulations. I didn't realize this myself until recently. Not overly shocked that the Biden administration was responsible for essentially crippling the crypto market while they were in office. What a huge shock. The administration that was responsible for the most amount of business crippling regulation in history was also passing a bill. I'm going to bring it up right now. This bill was called SAB 121. I'm going to bring it up right now. And this was a bill in a nutshell. I don't want to get too technical, Aaron, that told banks, world banks, commercial banks, local banks, that if any of their customers wanted to buy or own crypto, I'm going to bring this up, that they had to put it on their balance sheet and like hold the keys for the client. It was some really crazy thing that the banks would automatically say, we're never going to go near crypto if you're going to put this much regulation on our customers. So let me show this real quick here. So this is the bill here, okay? This is from July. U.S. House fails to override Biden's SEC veto of bill that would end controversial SEC guidance. So they tried to overturn this bill called SAB 121 back in July. Now, this just came up on the campaign trail, and I want to just go to the main part here that basically talks about what this is. Here we go right here. So SAB 121, most notably banks, it advised banks that customers' crypto assets in banks should be held on the bank's own balance sheets. That put digital assets in a unique custody category. And SEC Chair Gary Gensler has said it was an agency reaction to the industry turmoil that saw customers' assets get locked into crypto companies' bankruptcies. But the policy also threatened banks with higher capital demands if they handle customers' cryptocurrency. Right. So this paragraph right here, Aaron, is really important. So this bill, SAB 121, is a bill that basically is keeping banks out of the crypto, the Bitcoin, let's just talk Bitcoin, out of the Bitcoin game right now. Does that make sense? Yep.
Okay. So if banks are out of...
It's very similar to the cannabis situation in America, where you've got cannabis that's legalized in multiple states, but it's not legalized federally. Selling cannabis in these independent states, they can't actually process transactions with a real merchant account attached to a real bank because the banks have to operate at a federal level. So you've got all of these cannabis businesses in these legalized states that can't actually even process funds properly. They're having to take it through cash and all these other weird scenarios, which is actually just hurting the taxation ability of the country because it's not nationalized. So when you put these conditions in place, it cripples the ability for the industry to really take off.
Exactly right. Good analogy right there. Why would a bank want to be in the game? Why would a bank want to do anything with crypto assets knowing that they have to basically play by a whole new set of rules that really messes up their balance sheet, right?
There's always really dangerous ramifications when those things are put into place if they don't follow them exactly how it's supposed to be.
Big fines, potentially losing money for their shareholders. I mean, that bill put in place by the Biden administration and the SEC chair, Gary Gensler. And by the way, at the time of this recording, Trump has nominated a new SEC chair that is a crypto AI friendly guy. So the stage, this is the move to 100,000 right here. In a second, we're going to talk about how does it sustain itself with the two economic situations happening. So politically, Trump factor drove it to double from 55 or 60,000 when I actually mentioned it on our podcast back in September. You can pull that in the archives at the a2show.com. I said Bitcoin should be owned. It's now about $56,000. You'd be crazy to look the other way. It's now $101,000. So that's a 100% move. Not giving investment advice, but that was what I was doing at the time. Loading the boat pre-election in case something like this happened. Good. I'm still buying all the time for long term. Secondly, this bill, they're saying that when Congress signs on and Trump has to stay alive right now. And so does Robert F. Kennedy, who's also a huge crypto digital assets like crypto is digital autonomy. It's digital privacy. It's digital sovereignty. The far radical left doesn't understand that. They think everything is some sort of a conspiracy theory or a way to like not use the dollar, right? But this is about financial sovereignty. This is something everybody in the world should want. If they don't, they probably need their head examined. How can you have more money that is less exposed and that isn't part of the government Federal Reserve System? It's basically alternative investment vehicles, right? Like gold and silver and like real estate, really.
Well, and I'd like to pause there because I told you I'd pulled up some interesting facts today. A lot of the pushback historically against cryptocurrency, and I stole my cryptocurrency on a hard wallet. If you don't know what a hard wallet is, it's basically like a USB drive versus hot storage, which would be in like a brokerage.
Like Coinbase or Kraken or any of those?
Exactly. Like, there's Kraken, there's
Kraken and Coinbase are the big two.
Yeah, exactly. I store mine in a cold storage where I have access to it because there's been lots of situations where people have been hacked and lost their crypto. And that's just a preference thing. But one of the things that people have always pushed back on is that if you can have this currency that can't really be tracked, then it's probably just used for illicit criminal organizations to move money and launder money. Now, this was something that I thought was really interesting. This has
been the narrative for about 10 years now, by the way.
Yeah, and I thought that I would share this with you. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of Bitcoin usage, around 90%, is unrelated to illicit activities. This was confirmed by the DEA. Mm-hmm. So where there's these people thinking that it's all just money laundering and criminal activity, the DEA themselves has said that it's absolutely no more than 10%.
So they're just not seeing big criminal activity via the blockchain, via crypto, right? Good. Well, that's good because every investment class goes through this cycle of intense skepticism and conspiracy theory and all the labels, and then all of a sudden there's adoption, and then all of a sudden there's implementation, and there's different phases and levels of this. The two economic pieces I want to talk about right now are the staples for me to take anything seriously. So we talked about the two political components, obviously the Trump factor. He has to get sworn in, though. So let's just say there's a black swan event, Aaron, and Trump gets clipped. I actually think every day is a risk for Trump before he signs in, before he gets sworn in, I think on the 20th or whatever. If Trump gets clipped or somehow they find some weird way to get him out of office, you'll probably see the Bitcoin market tank because that was a Trump-friendly environment. And who comes in next? Typically, it would be J.D. Vance. I mean, I'm talking about a major, almost no percent chance here. This is a black swan 0.0001% thing. But hey, listen, there were 2 assassination attempts already, and the agenda that Trump wants to put in is it's so pro sovereignty. It's so pro-freedom. It's so pro-privacy. It's so get the government the hell off my back pro that, man, there's a lot of people that want to stop that, as America came very close to tipping past socialism and into Marxism and was literally on the doorstep of communism. So he's got to protect himself. And the people he's putting around him are pro-digital asset, pro-crypto sovereignty guys. That scares the hell out of the globalists because they start to lose control of the world and of the money supply and of the Federal Reserve. Very scary thing for them. So Trump's got to stay alive and get sworn in.
And for somebody who doesn't understand that, how are they losing control over the money supply? Well, right now, countries are responsible for printing their own currency and not the government. If you go and you dig deeper, it's actually not even the government that's responsible for printing their own money. It's actually private organizations that are printing the money. So
the Federal Reserve in the case of the United States.
Right, the Federal Reserve, right? And if you don't know anything about the Federal Reserve, you could go read, what was that great book? The
Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin is a masterclass in the history of the Federal Reserve. In fact, you and I saw him speak at least 2 or 3 times at big financial services events you and I used to go to back in the early 2000s. He's a brilliant economist and geopolitical expert.
And that book actually shows how and when the Federal Reserve was created and how it's actually not a government entity, which most people think it is. It's actually a private entity.
That's right.
And so when somebody else controls the money supply, they can inflate it or deflate it almost in demand, which is why you've seen, massive inflation, because they keep printing all this money and dropping it from the sky.
Oh yeah.
And when you look at Bitcoin, the thing with Bitcoin, that makes it very unique, which is what drew a lot of people to it, is it can't be manipulated in that way. I believe there's still only 21 million Bitcoin. The maximum number of Bitcoins
there is a limited supply.
The maximum number of Bitcoins,
I don't know what the total is
still 21 million. And it is now estimated that the last Bitcoin will be mined in 2040. So as of 2040, there won't even be any more mined. There will just be this supply of 21 million. And when the supply is controlled, then the value is controlled. When the supply can't be manipulated, then the value can't be manipulated. And so when you're not using the currency of somebody in control, you're using this other currency that can be stored cold, can be stored hot, can be moved around on your person. All of these elements, that is a definite threat to a lot of people in charge.
Yep, exactly right. And we'll link down below in the show notes at the a2show.com to The Creature from Jekyll Island, among a few other resources here at the end of this show. That's a great one. I'm glad you brought it up. Let's pivot to the economic piece. So the political stuff is in play, and it isn't etched in stone yet because, as I mentioned, Trump has to get sworn in. And then this bill, this SAB 121 bill, would have to be overturned. That would mean now, fortunately, Congress and Senate are controlled by Republicans who actually want freedom and sovereignty, unlike the other party that isn't even a party anymore. I could go on for days, as you know, that will cripple any sort of prosperity and any sort of humanity flourishing situation they can. So fortunately, we have the conservatives who are probably open and willing to overturn SAB 121, which would make banks willing and able and interested in getting in the crypto game, which means going to your bank and having a checking account, a savings account, and maybe a crypto account would be a real thing, which would be kind of cool, right? You go to your bank, let's say you bank at Chase, I have my checking account, my savings account, I might have some mutual funds, I have my Bitcoin there. That's really where this ultimately where we want it to go if SAB 121 gets overturned, and now it becomes another asset just like your checking account or a mutual fund or gold and silver, right? ETFs, whatever.
And that's a big reason why XRP is flourishing right now.
It is
with this new administration coming in and Trump saying he wants to remove the head of the SEC and nominate this other person. The XRP has been in a long battle with the SEC for about 5 years, and they've beat them pretty significantly. But they're still in the process of finishing that case up. So that was another reason that it really skyrocketed, was that administration.
So that SEC guy has to stay alive too, Aaron.
Right.
There's a lot of people that have to stay alive until January 20th. So that's I think this is a good piece of advice too. It sounds conspiratorial, but really it's very defensive and pragmatic. You've got to always think about, in the back of your head, business, investing, asset classes. What would be the worst case black swan event scenario? I always do that. You might look at it as negative, but I look at it as being really cautious, planning for the best. Right. So expecting the worst, but planning for the best, I guess, is, the phrase from the military.
And I think that's great advice. And I think that's what allows me to not beat myself up too much.
Exactly.
I had a lot of friends that went all in on Bitcoin.
Or do they still own it?
8-9 years ago.
Do they still own it, though, is the question?
Not all of them, for sure. A lot of them sold out along the way, which I don't blame them for.
Yeah, taking money off the table is a good thing.
There's a lot of people down here worth $50, $100, $200 million because of their adoption and going all in on it. And while I respect that, it's not the way that I approach things. I have cash, I have crypto, I have real estate, I have index funds, I have my investments fairly strongly diversified, and that maybe didn't get me that home run that everybody else got, but I'd rather play that game than be all in and be hit black.
I don't think you're giving bad advice, and I don't think we're by any means we're saying here you should be loading the boat and unwinding all your assets and putting it in Bitcoin. We're just saying that this is an asset class that's now on the radar, and there's four forces at play that are making it a legitimate asset class right now. Because the other thing I want to talk about is the comparisons you're seeing to manias of the past. You hear things like the tulip mania and things like that. I'm going to actually explain right now why it's not a mania, and I used to think it probably was until these two things happened. And by the way, both of these things only happened in 2024. So we have the two political forces we just talked about. Now let's talk about economics. You know, I spent 10 years in the investment banking business. I lived in New York for 20 years, so I was close to that world. I was out on Long Island, but I was back and forth to the city quite a bit. And when you're in that world, you understand how institutions operate. Wall Street companies, big banks like BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, the big names of today. In 2024, the ETFs launched, Aaron. Right. And if anybody doesn't know what an electronic traded fund is, an ETF, it's basically a mutual fund. It's just a different version of a fund. It's a different class of a fund. It's basically a basket of companies. Here is the biggest factor of all that got me to start investing aggressively into Bitcoin in 2024. When they launched ETFs, essentially mutual funds for Bitcoin. That basically means that Wall Street and the institutions and the big banks, not the commercial banks that we mentioned before, but the big banks said, hey, wait a minute, this is real. And in fact, it's so legitimate that we're going to put our clients' money in it in the form of a basket mutual fund ETF. There's a handful of ETFs right now that are Bitcoin ETFs that hold Bitcoin, and there's Bitcoin holding companies. So now all of a sudden, institution money is in the game. So to me, that's stop what you're doing, stop the press, forget everything else you thought up until this point. The biggest money in the world, the Wall Street money, the institution money is now in the game. Case closed, period, end of discussion. That's number one.
And there's an easy vehicle for you to get in the game with them.
Correct. You can actually play it less risky by being in a basket, so to speak, and
buy it through a normal brokerage,
professionally managed Fidelity ETF or whatever you want to call it. Exactly right. You have a more level playing field if you feel like I don't want to go own Bitcoin directly. Through Coinbase or through Kraken or one of the exchanges. Sometimes that stuff can be complicated.
And the other thing is you have some recourse if something goes wrong because you're investing through the vehicle of that bank. So there's some legal recourse versus buying from these places that could seem kind of shady and not regulated.
Yeah, or at the end of the day, just newer platforms, right? So I'm on Coinbase right now, and I'm setting my business account up on Kraken, right? So just for me, for diversification of two different platforms, right? So instead of having everything on Coinbase, I can be in Coinbase and Kraken combined. But I also own a Bitcoin ETF in my IRA. So I've spread the risk to your point. It's all crypto exposure, but it's also over 3 different platforms to spread out the risk. God forbid anything can go wrong, just like it can with any investment class. Gold, silver, real estate stocks doesn't make a difference, right? I saw a stock go down 72% the other day because I don't know, something happened with a balance sheet. You could be in a stock right now that goes down 72% tomorrow. You have no idea. Publicly traded company, you think you're safe, right? You bought it through Fidelity. It's the same thing at the end of the day. It happens all the time, right? So institutions are now in the game they were talking about it in 2023, but in 2024, these funds are now launched and live, and they're being bought up in size. You're now seeing institutional money going. Here's number 2, and this is one that is very, very new. And this is one that a lot of people are not aware of either. I've been doing a lot of due diligence on this one component. There is talk right now that potentially the United States and other countries are following, that they may make this, they may create what's called a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, countries all have to have assets in reserve, Aaron, as you know. So Canada, where you're from, the U.S., where I'm from, most countries own a lot of gold. They have a lot of gold in reserve. Russia has a lot of gold. China has a lot of gold. America has tons of gold stashed in, I think, Fort Knox in D.C. I don't know what the situation was with Canada, but countries are required to keep certain assets on their balance sheet. Cash, gold, silver. A lot of times they own stocks. Now there's talk that countries might use Bitcoin as a reserve. It might become an asset class. Now, this is something that isn't done yet, like the Wall Street ETFs are done. That's a done deal. That's legitimacy in the books. This piece right here, whether it becomes a reserve, whether the U.S. uses it, another potential rumor here, whether the U.S., Aaron, even uses it as a way to get out of the astronomical debt that the country is in, is also another talking point right now as this new administration gets in. Could Bitcoin actually get America out of debt? Could it get other countries out of debt? And could it be used as a strategic reserve in which companies could put it on their balance sheet and grow it? Now, that's interesting. And if that starts to get looked at like gold, it starts to become adopted by not only institutions on Wall Street, which is where all the money goes in the world, but also countries. That is
well, and
next
when
level.
you talk about the countries, I don't know how much you were following it over the last couple of years, but the president of El Salvador,
There's one there, yeah. He's been
made Bitcoin legal tender in mid 2021, and they've been buying Bitcoin heavily since that point. And one of the reasons that they made that move, which was very controversial at the time, is he said, we want to get out from under the thumb of the American control and them constantly inflating, deflating, making everything in the US dollar. We need to be sovereign. We need to be independent. And the only way we can do that is by pivoting to something that can't be manipulated.
And the reason that didn't get a lot of attention is because it's El Salvador. It's basically a no-name, typically a corrupt country, very small, no real GDP. So it wasn't like India did this or China did this. Or Australia did this. It wasn't like that. It was some little micro Central American country. But the fact is, they might have found a way to play the game. Now, so a lot of this puts the U.S. dollar at risk. So there's even talk that the U.S. dollar is at risk because what if more money starts going into crypto and Bitcoin reserve, just like it did at one point to gold and silver, right? There was a gold standard at one point, right? So we can look at the gold standard and say, does Bitcoin start to adopt some of the same characteristics of gold, in which there was a gold standard up until the 70s? Richard Nixon removed America from the gold standard. So if this goes, so there's one political thing that's already etched in stone done, the Trump factor. He has to stay alive. There's the SAB 121 bill that has to get unpassed. Wall Street's already buying. That's enormous for flows. That's probably what's kept it up and it's keeping it afloat. And then if it starts getting adopted as a reserve currency for countries, if America decides they want to put X amount of Bitcoin, and they already have a certain amount of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Last I looked here, let me bring this up right now. So this is as of, give me 1 second here. So if you're watching at the a2show.com, can a Bitcoin reserve move forward with Congress expert? The U.S. government already holds more than 208,000 Bitcoin, but located than might be assumed. So this is the talk. Immediately it's rejected, Aaron, because it has to be, right? Immediately it's rejected because it has to be. But this is something that I think, this was last month. This was a little less than 30 days ago. Experts will always disagree with anything new at first, and they'll usually label it and put it down right away. So not unexpected that it got labeled as probably never going to happen. But the fact that they have 208,000 Bitcoin at, let's call it $100,000. Are you good at math? What's 208,000 times 100,000? I don't even think my calculator.
I'm not even going to try to do that. I'm going to do that on my calculator right now.
I'm doing it right now too. 208,000 times 100,000, which is what Bitcoin is now essentially.
Probably go higher than my calculator.
I think it's 2.08 trillion.
Yeah, it's
something
going
those.
2.08 E10 on my calculator.
That's trillion, right? So that's a lot of trillions, right? That they have now, and now there's talk, does America continue to buy it to basically pump up its assets and get out of some debt and gain on Bitcoin going a lot higher than 100,000? Some of the predictions right now are 150, 200, quarter million short term. I think obviously some aggressive pullbacks that will shake people out and make them wish they never bought it.
They're very
20,
common.
30, 40% pullbacks, cut in half. It's a very volatile asset, but what you're also going to start seeing is these big swings, 5,000 point swing days, 2,000 point swing days, where before they've been a few hundred, right? So you have to have stomach for it, but the two political forces and the two economic forces are in place and are happening, and that's what completely removes the conversation from this being some sort of a mania. If you look at I think the most popular mania was the tulip mania of the early 1900s. Wall Street wasn't buying tulips. No, they weren't thinking about putting tulips on their balance sheet, and they weren't passing bills about tulips. So to put that to bed, you got to look at what you can look at a mania, but you've never seen Wall Street and governments thinking about getting on board manias for the most part.
Well, I think we have to look back to our previous episodes, and one of the things that we talk about all the time is follow the money.
Exactly.
There's no way that your BlackRocks your Fidelities and your Cities and these banks are creating these vehicles and investing their consumers' money into these vehicles without having a considerable amount of inside knowledge of what's going on in the government, what's about to happen in the government. They're not going to expose themselves. They're not going to invest that kind of capital, the kind of resources to make that happen. So when that happens, it's almost an automatic green light that this is the direction that this is going to go. And you can feel quite a certain level of certainty in that decision. And I think
you're exactly right. They don't have to buy it, Aaron.
No.
They can make as much money as they could ever need being in traditional ETFs, stock funds, gold, silver funds, real estate investment trust. Like, they don't need to add an asset class to any of what they do, to any of their offerings, unless they feel that asset class has a chance to be a home run in the years ahead. They don't have to do it. They're rich as can be already.
So that they clearly know something that the average person last year didn't know.
That's correct.
Because they're on the inside.
That's right.
Right. And the second thing I would say is when you're looking at it, understand that historically, and I don't have the chart in front of me, but it's something like every 3 years, Bitcoin's dropped by like 40% in one shot.
Yep.
And so what you have to understand is that if you want to be a trader, like you do some trading, the nice thing about the crypto market is it is volatile. And that's where traders make money, is in volatile markets. So if you want to be a trader, it actually sets you up quite well because it's volatile. The other side of it is you're just a long-term investor like I am with the majority of my things, where I say, okay, I'm going to put this in here for the next 10 years. And I'm going to, I suspect that it's going to end up being at this, level in 10 years when I want to pull it out and retire or whatever the case may be. Right. So
exactly.
When you actually look, you have a chart here in front of you, Andrew.
I'm going to pull it up. Can you see it? Am I showing right now? Or you see it, but I don't know if the viewers see it. Hold on.
I don't think the viewers see it.
All right. So here we go. Here's the big daddy. Let me move myself out of the way here. Hold on.
Sure. And what is the time range that you have on this chart right now?
One sec. There we go. Okay. This here is, first of all, this is where Bitcoin is right now, 99,000. I want to go down to the bottom piece right here. I think this is important. Here it is right here at the time of this recording, right? So December 5th, which was yesterday, Bitcoin hit a record high of 104,630. So that triggered this episode here, right? Is that we wanted to talk about the fact that it crossed 100,000. This is a chart. Let me go to full chart here. That's a daily chart. Let's look at the last. There we go. Right. So we can go back. Let's go all time. Here we go. All time. There you go. So there is this is when it was just bouncing around. I remember buying a little bit in 2012 and I took a course and I was like, yeah, whatever. This is nothing. I've always had a little bit since like 2014, 15, not much. But really, again, didn't start taking it seriously until the big, again, follow the money. Wall Street started forming ETFs. That's been talked about since 2022. It was implemented in 2023. And they were launched in 2024. So that's where you got, and if we go right here, right, if you look at the downtime, right, all in here, there was a huge move here in 2022, huge decline back. I mean, this was lights out right here, Aaron. Can you see this?
That was a monster.
This thing is totally dead.
It's done.
Never to be returned again. 14,004 after topping out at 68,000 in 2022. This is, COVID
that's
money.
When the government really started being vocal about wanting to shut it down.
Oh, yeah. This was all, again, this comes back to the current administration that lives for regulation. Everything they can regulate, they will if they get away with it. And this was all that talk in here. And then eventually, this move right here is when the talk of Wall Street started happening. Here it is. It's pretty much an uptrend from 2022 all the way to early 2024, right into the adoption of ETFs and Wall Street saying, we are now in this game. We've now formed the vehicles and the instruments to play this game. And now all of a sudden it's bounced around. This is right here, Aaron, this here. This is all who's going to win the election.
Yep.
Sideways. Trump victory, pro crypto, gone. 60,000 to 104,000. Gone like the wind. That's what that was.
And I think you'll see. I think you'll see a pullback because that's a big run. But if you look at the chart, if you look at from 2000 to 18, if you look at 2018 where it really started to take off and people started to say this is something, right? Yep. It was about $10,000 per Bitcoin in 2018.
There you go. Yeah, 12, 13, 14. Yep.
And people and it was a big rise and everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's going somewhere. It's going somewhere." And then you got big dump. down by
Of
half, and
course.
then you came back up, and then another big dump, and then it really took off, and then another big. This is a roller
Sideways
coaster.
for years here, Aaron. Sideways
Absolutely.
for years.
But if you take a step back from it from a long-term perspective, 2018 to effectively 2025 is 7 years.
Yep.
And in that 7 years, it's gone from 10,000 to 100,000. So it's 1,000% return.
That's right.
Over 7 years. So if you just parked it in there and went and hung out and didn't get involved in all of the chaos and the news and the pundits and whatever, you made a 1,000% return, right?
Exactly.
Which is the assets that we typically look at and play the long game with.
Well, listen, Aaron, it's a 10x return from 10,000 to 100,000, right? Yep. And at the end of the day, that is probably outperforming every single asset that's out there right now. If I had to guess, is there a 10x in 10 years? Was it 10 years? You said 2018, so not even 10 years. 8 years?
7 years, right?
Is there a 10x return on anything? The S&P 500 hasn't done 10x in 8 years.
No. I'm actually looking at I'm going to look at the DJI.
You know what I want to look at also? I want to look at gold. What has gold done in that same time frame? Because the
Definitely
comparison not that much. I've always owned gold. I like owning gold. I buy gold, right? I think it's a great asset to have. But I don't think it hasn't seen 10x. Although gold was at $200-300 an ounce. I don't know what year. It's now almost $3,000 an ounce. So your gold has had a pretty substantial move as well, 10x, but over a longer period of time. I don't know if I can throw gold into this chart that I'm looking at right here, but you get the point here, right? This is here to stay. I would love to see, Aaron, this thing tank down to about 80,000.
Yep.
Because I would just like to buy more cheaper. I think people will go, oh, look, I told you. It went from 104,000 to 80,000. It's done. But that's what they said when it went from 14,000 to 10. And then when it went from 25,000 to 14. And then when it went from 50,000 to 30. And then when it went from 60,000 to 40. And here we are at 104,000. So,
and I'm gonna give people two good books right now. One of them is called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And the other one's called The Bitcoin Standard. So if you don't actually understand Bitcoin yet, I would recommend you read the Bitcoin Standard because it explains all of the technical aspects of it. And Morgan Housel with The Psychology of Money is a really good book to read because there's some really interesting psychological elements that they study with people when it comes to investing. And one of the ones that I really like, and this will happen in the next couple of weeks, so remember this, is that he says, only in investing do people refuse to get excited when something goes on sale.
It's amazing, right?
So it's the only thing in the world that is completely illogical in every single way it's approached. If you go to a restaurant and something is on sale, you are excited. If you go to the grocery store and it's on sale, it's excited. You go to a restaurant, you're excited. You're thinking, I'm getting more value for my money today. But if all of a sudden, for example, Bitcoin drops a week from now to 80,000, which it could very well do. It's done that many, many times. Your natural response is, oh, this wasn't real. I didn't know what I was doing. The government's probably going to shut it down. I'm going to pull out all my money instead of buying it up when it's on sale. It's just on sale.
The only person I know who lives by that is Warren Buffett, which is why he's one of the richest men in the world.
Absolutely.
He loves it. I think he said, when there's blood in the streets, that's when I buy.
Yep.
Right. So I would expect that. I mean, this has been almost 100% move. I remember giving this to our viewers at 55,000 on a show in September. It's now it's the middle of December at the time of the show. That's a big move. 55,000 to 104,000, let's call it. So if you see this thing drop from, I actually think it's going to jump to about 120, 130 before it tanks back down to maybe 80, 90 where it is now, or a little bit lower. Who cares? It's part of the cycle. But I would say for anybody who's not understanding Bitcoin or not realizing what's going on, you now know exactly what's going on from a political standpoint and from an economic standpoint. So for me, it's one of those asset classes where just chip away, dollar cost average. What that means is you buy a little bit every month. You don't try to time it. You don't try to buy it at the perfect time and wait. You just go, you know what? On the first of every month, I'm going to invest X amount into this Bitcoin asset class. And this is exactly how big fund managers do it. They buy a little bit of stock every month on the first of the month, let's say. This is good old-fashioned automatic millionaire David Bach type philosophy. Aaron, you and I remember when we were doing business with him at one point, and his whole entire strategy was automatic investments, certain day of the month, no emotion, no attachment to price, and over time you win because you're buying some low and some high, but you're not trying to time it. I don't think people are looking at it this way with Bitcoin, which I think would be a mistake.
I agree with you completely. And for those people that think they're smarter than everybody else and they can time it, if you actually do some research on the track records of people over 5 to 10 years who had a good year and then think they're geniuses, the average fund manager can't beat the Dow Jones index year in and year out. So if you think you're smarter than everybody else, okay, but if you got it, you probably got lucky, and you're probably going to get unlucky. Yeah. Just play the long game.
Yep. I mean, I bought some, Aaron, at 101,000 yesterday. Sure. And I said, I know I'm probably going to regret this because it's so high, but I'm not going to be emotional because I don't care. In fact, I want it to go lower. I want to lose a lot of money on this last clip because then I can buy more at a cheaper price, because this is an asset class that will be a multi-six-figure asset class, most likely simply because of demand. But if we get those political bills passed, and if they become reserve currency. So remember, 4 things I talked about in closing. 2 were political. 1 is already etched in stone. President got elected who's pro-crypto. Now he has to stay alive, so there's a black swan play. But the bill, the SAB 121 bill, would have to get overturned. That would be a rocket ship for Bitcoin. So I wouldn't want to be on the sidelines if that bill gets overdone in January, February of 2024. And then again, Wall Street's already in the game. Check that box. Our country's now going to start putting this on the balance sheet. And the last thing I want to say, because we have mainly a business owner audience here, Aaron, is a lot of the research I'm doing right now from really smart people. These are hedge fund managers. These are guys who own a lot of Bitcoin, but they also are regulars on CNBC and Fox Business News and places like this. They're authors, they're speakers. So these are guys with high credibility. They're not like a TikTok influencer who just started pumping Bitcoin last week. We talked about track records in our last episode. These are guys with deep multi-decade track records who are now saying this asset class is real and I'm in the game. Here's what I would say to business owners. What I'm now seeing from publicly traded companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Meta, the Big Seven, the Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call them, they're now putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Yep. So you as a business owner, I'm doing this right now for my company, what would make you not want to own a building, own gold and silver, own stocks and bonds, and own Bitcoin, a digital currency, a digital asset on your balance banking, on your business banking balance sheet? That's now what we're seeing happen with companies. Microsoft right now did an interview, or an interview was done, I think it was at our investor day, and they were talking about what would it look like for Microsoft to own X amount of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So now we have publicly traded companies talking about putting this asset class on their balance sheet. What about you as a business owner? It doesn't matter if you're not a Microsoft or publicly traded. You have a balance sheet for your business. Do you put Bitcoin on the balance sheet of your business? I think so. I mean, why wouldn't you? Especially if you're in the digital world or the internet world. This is a digital asset class now that is perfectly congruent with everything that you're doing if you're a digital or internet entrepreneur.
And the other side of that is you may want to start looking at the different ways that you can accept Bitcoin as payment.
I'm seeing that a little bit now too. Yep. I'm seeing that a little bit now too. Why not? I mean, that's true. Yeah. So do you start taking it as a payment method? You certainly could. We're starting to see that crop up. But at the end of the day here, I think the takeaway is how do you play the asset? And I think the key takeaway is we now have an asset on our hands, not an idea and not a mania. And for all the reasons we mentioned here today, 2 political, 2 economic, 2 already etched in stone, 2 variables that are on the table that if they hit, goodbye, see you later, 200,000 plus. If they don't hit, probably a little bit of a setback, but not a destruction. So you're probably looking in the next 60 days, and we'll come back to it on the show, you're probably looking at another parabolic move based on the 2 of the 4 happening, or the 2 of the 4 not happening and maybe seeing a 30-40% pullback, which becomes an opportunity for the next move up, because if they don't happen now, they might happen later. But I think the key is the asset's here to stay, and it's going to be mentioned in the same conversation in category as stocks, bonds, and gold, and that's a different playing field.
Awesome. Great episode today.
Glad you liked it. There's about 3 books we're going to put in the show notes down below. Things you want to get educated about. I like books offline because a lot of times online stuff becomes very distraction. It's very distractive, and it's also can be manipulated and censored a little bit. So some great books we want to put down below just to give you some history. I think it's important to look at the history of asset classes becoming adopted into society, and this being one of them right now. So a2show.com. I'm Andrew. That's Aaron. We will see you on the next one. Over and out.